How a 10-year-old in Japan discovered that butterfly memories can survive metamorphosis and may pass to the next generation. At a major international science conference, something unusual was happening at one of the exhibition booths. A crowd of professional researchers had gathered, not around a senior academic or a groundbreaking lab, but around a child. He was 10 years old, and the scientists were hanging on his every word. His name is Jonah Guy, and what he had discovered in his bedroom in Kobe, Japan, was about to challenge one of the most fundamental assumptions in insect biology. To understand why this matters, you need to know a little bit about what happens inside a chrysalis. When a caterpillar undergoes metamorphosis, its body breaks down almost entirely. Organs dissolve, structures reorganize from scratch. What emerges is, in almost every biological sense, a completely different creature. For a long time, this led scientists to assume that anything the caterpillar had experienced, any association it had formed, any response it had learned, would be erased in the process. The butterfly, in this view, starts fresh, a blank slate. But Jonah had been raising swallowtail butterflies since he was very young, and from an early age he was doing something most children don't do. He wasn't just collecting them or keeping them as pets, he was watching them, documenting their behavior, writing down patterns, building up page by page a detailed record of how they lived and moved and responded to the world around them. In kindergarten, he ran experiments on how long butterflies survived if trapped inside their chrysalis. In first grade, he documented a caterpillar species that molted more often than expected. He won awards for both. By second grade, he had already filled hundreds of pages with handwritten observations. And somewhere in all of that data, he kept noticing something that didn't fit the standard picture. The butterflies he had raised from caterpillars behaved differently around him compared to ones he caught in the wild. When he tried to release them, they seemed to gravitate back toward him. They were calmer in his presence. More familiar somehow. It was a small observation, easy to dismiss, but Jonah couldn't let it go. Could a butterfly actually remember something from before it became a butterfly? To answer that question, Jonah did what any serious researcher would do. He started reading the scientific literature. That's when he found the work of entomologist Dr. Martha Weiss, who had published a study showing that moths could retain memories formed during their caterpillar stage, even after complete metamorphosis. It was a controversial finding. Most scientists had assumed metamorphosis was so extensive it would wipe any learned associations clean. And it was exactly what Jonah had been looking for. In the spring of 2022, Dr. Weiss received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter, 4 pages long, from a second grader in Japan. Jonah explained who he was, what he had observed, and what he wanted to do. Replicate her study, but with swallowtail butterflies instead of moths. He had also attached years' worth of handwritten data he had been collecting since kindergarten, laid out in careful detail. Dr. Weiss was touched, but she was also skeptical. A home replication of a controlled laboratory study by a 7-year-old seemed unlikely to produce meaningful results. She wrote back warmly, but suggested he start with something simpler. Jonah wrote back again. And this time, he didn't just push back on the suggestion. He pushed back on her methodology. He had questions about the chemical she had used, ethyl acetate, widely used in entomology as a killing agent. Why use something insects are already averse to as your test stimulus? Wouldn't that introduce an uncontrolled variable and compromise the results? Dr. Weiss later admitted that, for a moment, she felt a little defensive. She had run the appropriate controls and was confident in her choices. But when she sat with the question and thought it through honestly, she realized the boy had a point. That was the moment she decided to take him seriously. Over the following months, the two exchanged ideas regularly: how to adapt her lab protocols for a home setting, and how to make sure the results would hold up to scrutiny. By autumn 2022, Jonah wrote to say the study was complete. This time, the envelope contained 33 pages of data. Here is what he did. Jonah raised 2 groups of swallowtail caterpillars. One group, the experimental group, was trained to associate a specific scent with a mild electric shock. The other group received no training at all and served as the control. For the scent, Jonah chose lavender oil. This was a deliberate departure from the ethyl acetate used in the original study. His reasoning was straightforward. If you want to test whether an animal has genuinely learned to avoid something, the stimulus shouldn't be something it might already respond to for unrelated reasons. Lavender was unfamiliar to the caterpillars. It gave the experiment a cleaner baseline. For the shock intensity, he didn't pick a level arbitrarily. He started at the lowest available setting and increased it gradually while closely observing the caterpillar's responses. When he saw the first clear sign of discomfort, the caterpillars extending a small defensive organ called an osmeterium, he stopped. That was the level he used for every trial, no higher. He also placed the electrode pad on his own arm alongside the caterpillar so he could feel exactly what they were feeling. While both groups were going through metamorphosis, Jonah spent the time building a Y-shaped tube maze from materials he had at home. Sugar water was placed at both ends. On one side, he added a small cotton pad soaked in lavender oil. When the control, butterflies, the ones with no prior training, were placed into the maze, they split almost evenly between the two sides, roughly 50-50, exactly what chance would predict. Then came the trained butterflies. If metamorphosis had erased their memories, they should have behaved the same way as the controls. But around 70% of them chose to avoid the side with the lavender. That result is statistically significant. It cannot easily be explained by chance. Metamorphosis had not erased what they had learned. The memory had survived. Most researchers would have stopped there. That result alone was worth publishing. But Jonah kept going. Around that time, he noticed something about his own family. He, his mother, and his grandmother all suffered from hay fever. The same sensitivity, showing up across 3 generations without any of them choosing it or learning it. It made him wonder whether something similar could be happening with his butterflies. Could the memory, or at least the biological change that produced it, be inherited? He began raising a new group of caterpillars, the offspring of the butterflies he had already trained. These caterpillars received no conditioning of any kind, no lavender, no shocks, no training whatsoever. When they completed metamorphosis and were placed into the same maze, most of them avoided the lavender side, in almost exactly the same proportion as their parents had. Jonah repeated the experiment with a 3rd generation. The pattern held again. What this suggests goes well beyond individual memory. The experience of the first generation may have altered something at a deeper biological level, something that was then passed down to their offspring and their offspring's offspring without any direct experience of the original event. Jonah also observed that the avoidance behavior appeared stronger in male offspring than in females. But he was careful here. That observation came from a small data set, and it had never been part of his original design. He flagged it as preliminary and said he would need far more trials before drawing conclusions. That kind of scientific restraint is something many experienced researchers struggle with. In a 10-year-old, it is remarkable. As word of Jonah's work spread through the scientific community, researchers who had spent entire careers studying insects began paying close attention. He was invited to present at international conferences, where professional entomologists lined up to speak with him. He was even invited to present his findings privately to the Crown Prince of Japan. And in December 2024, he finally met Dr. Weiss in person, 2 years after that first handwritten letter had set all of this in motion. Jonah's research does not offer final answers. What he has shown needs to be replicated across larger sample sizes, tested in other species, and examined with far greater rigor before strong conclusions can be drawn. But the questions he has raised are genuine ones. If experiences can leave biological traces that outlast a single lifetime, if what one generation learns can quietly shape the biology of the next, then our understanding of memory, inheritance, and the line between them may be far less settled than we assumed. Those are not small questions, and they were first asked, seriously and carefully, with real experimental evidence, by a child in Kobe who just wanted to know whether his butterflies remembered him.